0. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Wow, what a place. What a view, isn't it, John? It's absolutely unreal.
As the story goes, the US sent astronauts to the moon in 1969, effectively winning the space race with Russia. However, is that really what happened? Popular podcaster Joe Rogan and his guests have discussed this at length, and what they reveal might shock you. Stay tuned as we dissect Joe Rogan revealing the shocking truth about the moon landing. Why do people love conspiracy theories? Well, scientists have discovered 3 psychological reasons why people enjoy conspiracy theories. One of them is the desire to know the truth and to have clarity and certainty. Conspiracy theories provide simple explanations for complex events, filling in the gaps left by official accounts. Another reason is existential, the desire to feel secure and in command. By blaming powerful and sinister groups for their problems, conspiracy theories help people cope with uncertainty and threats. And the last reason that conspiracy theories are popular is the desire to belong and have a positive self-image. People who believe in conspiracy theories have a sense of identity and community. They also make people feel superior and special in comparison to others who are unaware of the truth. However, many conspiracy theories have eventually been proven to be fact. So are the conspiracy theories about NASA's mission to the moon part of those proven to be true? Joe Rogan admitted he was once balls deep into conspiracies about the moon landing, and it's interesting to hear him talk about it.
The moon landing one's my favorite.
Really?
I got balls deep in that for years. I was completely
So you
convinced.
think they did not go to the moon?
No, I don't think that anymore.
Rogan is a popular guy who many people would swear is among the most rational people, so why would he ever have doubts about an event like going to the moon, credited to NASA consuming billions of dollars and shown on TV? Rogan gave several reasons for reaching his conclusions about whether NASA's astronauts ever went to the moon, and these reasons are very difficult to brush off or explain away. Here is the first one, which he told his guest, who was also surprised to hear it.
7 attempts, 6 of them successful. But they went to the Apollo 13 was the one that they didn't apparently make it, and they had to come back. But that was the only time in history that a human being has been more than 400 miles above the Earth's surface. All the space station missions, all the space shuttle missions, all that stuff is
within orbit.
Yeah, it's low. It's all very low. They went 260,000 miles out and back into deep space, but they had never even flown a chicken out there and see if it comes back alive.
Rogan thinks it's weird that NASA didn't attempt to put animals on the moon first before sending humans, which is weird if you really think about it. Laika, a dog, became the first Earthling to orbit her home planet in 1957. The furry cosmonaut looped around the Earth in the Sputnik 2 space capsule nearly 4 years before the first human space traveler. When Laika made her historic journey, it was still unclear whether humans could survive even for a few hours in space. She was practically a canary in a coal mine. In the early days of human spaceflight, scientists didn't even know if humans would be able to digest their food in space. They were concerned that humans might suffocate on the contents of their own stomachs if it all floated up. Laika sadly died during her historic flight, but she and the other animals sent into space during those early tests assisted scientists in answering the question, what happens to the human body in space? In general, scientists are still attempting to answer that question, albeit at a much more nuanced level than they were in 1957. Initially, sending animals to space was done to ensure that human astronauts could survive in space at all. As spaceflight programs developed in the 1960s and 1970s, scientists were able to turn off gravity, a variable they could never completely eliminate on Earth. By the 1980s, people were using space to conduct experiments that directly affected the health of people on the ground, an application that the scientists conducting the first animal tests in the 1940s could never have predicted. Today, animal tests are assisting scientists in preparing for the dangers that humans will face if they ever want to visit Mars or live on the moon's surface for extended periods of time. Although the American space traveler Ham the Chimp experienced some celebrity fame in 1961 when he safely returned to Earth after a brief trip to space, Laika the dog may be the most famous animal to have ever traveled to space. NASA astronaut Alan Shepard became the first American to cross that boundary 3 months later. Fruit flies were the first living beings to be launched into space, and they returned to Earth alive. NASA conducted flight tests with 6 rhesus monkeys named Albert, followed by a Roman numeral, between 1948 and 1951. Albert II was the first primate to reach space, but Albert VI, also known as Yorick, was the only one who survived long enough to be rescued. However, he died soon after, possibly as a result of the heat and stress of being trapped inside it. In total, the Soviet and American space programs launched mice, rats, dogs, monkeys, and a rabbit into space in the 1950s. The frequency of animal spaceflights decreased after humans ventured into orbit in the early 1960s, and Americans made it all the way to the moon in 1969. After that, the focus of animal flights shifted. By the late 1960s, both the Soviet Union and the United States were sending a much broader range of life forms to space, including jellyfish, tortoises, frog eggs, microorganisms, spiders, amoebae, and algae. Scientists wanted to know not only if life could survive in space, but also how different types of life could thrive and develop there. But then Joe Rogan talks about another reason why many people doubt that NASA astronauts ever went to the moon.
Unmanned drones like what we have on Mars and things like that. We've never really sent a living thing out through the magnetosphere, through the Van Allen radiation belts, into deep space. Have it, there's all these possibilities of solar flares and anything that would have killed them instantly. And they just did that. And then we haven't been able to do that since 1972.
The magnetosphere of the Earth is the region of space surrounding the planet that is influenced by its magnetic field. Electric currents in the Earth's molten iron core generate the magnetic field. The magnetosphere shields the Earth from harmful solar and cosmic radiation by deflecting the majority of the sun's charged particles. The pressure of the solar wind, a stream of charged particles that constantly blows from the sun, determines the shape of the magnetosphere. The solar wind compresses the magnetosphere on one side and stretches it into a long tail on the other. The magnetopause is the boundary between the magnetosphere and the solar wind, and the bow shock is the shock wave formed when the solar wind collides with the magnetosphere. The magnetosphere is a dynamic system that changes as the solar wind and the Earth's magnetic field change. NASA investigates the magnetosphere with various missions and instruments to learn how it affects our space environment and the habitability of our planet. And the Van Allen radiation belt Rogan refers to is a region of space around Earth that is trapped by the planet's magnetic field. There are 2 main belts, an inner belt that extends from approximately 640 to 13,000 kilometers above the surface, and an outer belt that extends from approximately 13,000 to 58,000 kilometers. The belts were discovered in 1958 by James Van Allen using data from the Explorer 1 satellite. The particles in the Van Allen belts are mostly made up of solar wind, which is the stream of charged particles emitted by the sun. Some particles can also be emitted by cosmic rays or the Earth's atmosphere. The particles spiral around the magnetic field lines, bouncing back and forth between the Earth's 2 poles. The belt's intensity and shape can change depending on solar activity and the Earth's magnetic field. The high-energy particles in the Van Allen belts can damage satellites and spacecraft that orbit within or near them. So, if NASA did send astronauts to the moon with the tech available in the 60s and 70s, why have we not gone back yet?
The technology is far superior, except that they're not using that technology for manned space travel into deep space like that and to go into the moon. So it's like our technology in all these other areas is superior, but they haven't really worked towards that because they haven't been funded. So the big issue is, in many ways, it's money.
As Rogan mentions, funding is a huge issue with missions to the moon. NASA's ambitious goal of returning astronauts to the moon by 2024 faces a significant funding challenge. The space agency estimates that $25.4 billion will be needed in the fiscal year 2023, including $7.5 billion for the Artemis program to keep the project on track for a lunar landing as soon as 2025. This budget request, however, is not guaranteed to be approved by Congress, which has the final say over how much money NASA receives and how it spends it. Furthermore, the moon mission competes with other NASA priorities and programs for funding and support. One of the primary reasons that NASA is having difficulty funding the return of astronauts to the moon is that the mission is very expensive and complex, requiring new rockets, landers, spacesuits, and technologies. NASA intends to launch astronauts to lunar orbit using its Space Launch System SLS rocket and Orion capsule, where they will rendezvous with a gateway station and transfer to a human landing system HLS vehicle to descend to the surface. The SLS and Orion have been in development for more than a decade with delays and cost overruns, and the HLS is still in its early stages of development and has been the subject of legal wranglings and protests from rival companies. Another reason that NASA is having difficulty funding the return of astronauts to the moon is that the mission competes with other NASA priorities, such as Earth science, climate change research, Mars exploration, space station operations, and commercial crew and cargo programs. NASA has requested $7.8 billion for science, $1 billion for aeronautics, $1.6 billion for space technology, $4 billion for exploration systems development, $2.9 billion for exploration research and technology, $1 billion for space operations, $1.6 billion for STEM engagement, $3.2 billion for safety, security, and mission services, and $0.4 billion for construction and environmental compliance for the fiscal year 2023. Each of these areas has its own set of objectives, stakeholders, and benefits for NASA and the country. The moon mission also lacks political consensus and stability, as different administrations and congresses may have different visions and goals for NASA and its human spaceflight program. Over the years, the moon mission has been the subject to delays, cancellations, and changes in direction. The Trump administration, for example, accelerated the lunar landing target from 2028 to 2024, whereas the Biden administration has yet to commit to a specific date. The Biden administration has also emphasized the value of diversity and inclusion in the Artemis program, as well as international and commercial collaboration. And Congress has also spoken out on various aspects of the moon mission, including the need for a second HLS provider in addition to SpaceX, the extension of the International Space Station until 2030, and support for a robotic moon rover to search for ice. Rogan also mentions another possible reason why human astronauts have yet to walk the moon again.
It's also very risky to send humans out there. I mean, we're talking about manned missions to Mars now, which may or may not take place by 2030. They're talking about doing that. But it's way cheaper and safer to send robots out there. Why risk human lives? It's it's very retro.
Sending humans to the moon is a risky and expensive endeavor that may not be worthwhile, especially when robots can perform many of the same tasks without endangering lives or necessitating costly life support systems. Here are some reasons why sending robots to the moon instead of humans makes more sense. The harsh environment of space and the lunar surface endangers humans. We require oxygen, water, food, shelter, and defense against radiation, micrometeorites, extreme temperatures, and dust. They're also affected physiologically and psychologically by weightlessness, isolation, and stress. These factors impair their performance, health, and well-being, while also increasing the likelihood of accidents and fatalities. Robots, on the other hand, have no biological requirements or limitations. They can work in any environment, can withstand higher levels of radiation and temperature, and can work for longer periods of time without becoming tired or bored. Humans in space and on the moon are expensive to send and maintain. They will need large and complex rockets, capsules, landers, habitats, spacesuits, and vehicles to transport them to and from the moon safely and comfortably. They also require continuous communication, monitoring, and replenishment from Earth. All of these factors add up to a significant expense that could be better spent on other scientific or social priorities. Robots are far less expensive and easier to send and operate in space and on the moon. They can be launched on smaller and less expensive rockets, consume less fuel and power, and transport more scientific instruments than humans. They do not require constant communication or resupply from Earth. You must also remember that on the moon, human scientific capabilities and objectives are limited. They can only explore a small area surrounding their landing site, collect a limited number of samples, conduct a few experiments, and stay for a limited amount of time. They also face ethical and legal challenges in terms of preserving and exploiting the lunar environment and resources. Robots, however, have the ability to explore much larger areas of the moon, collect more diverse and abundant samples, conduct more sophisticated and long-term experiments, and stay on the lunar surface indefinitely. They also do not raise any ethical because, well, nobody cares about what happens to them or legal concerns about the lunar environment or resources. And this is where it gets interesting, as Rogan says some of the footage of the moon mission might not be exactly what you were seeing.
There's unquestionably some stuff that, whether it was images or video, that was faked. Gemini 15 is the big one because there's a photo of Michael Collins. It shows him in deep space, and they use it as a press release saying that he was on a spacewalk, when it was really an image of him from a test run where there was all this stuff in the background and he was on this harness, and they just blacked out the background and tried to sell it as him being in space.
There are certain issues that do cast doubt on the Apollo mission. One of them is the moon rock gifted to a world leader turning out to be fake. No, not the world leader being fake, but the supposed moon rock. NASA distributed moon rocks to over 100 countries in the years following the moon landing. During their global tour following the moon landing, Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Edwin Buzz Aldrin presented a moon rock to Dutch Prime Minister Willem Drees. Drees desired this stone, which he later donated to the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam after his death. However, it was discovered in 2009 that the alleged moon rock was actually petrified wood, possibly from Arizona. The Nixon administration gave nearly 270 rocks scooped up by US astronauts to foreign countries. However, experts and research from the Associated Press indicate that the whereabouts of some of the small rocks are unknown. While genuine moon rocks are worthless, in mineral terms, black market collectors can pay six-figure sums for them. In one known legal sale of moon samples, 0.2 grams of moon soil from an unmanned Russian probe was auctioned off at Sotheby's in 1993 for $442,500. The majority of the 382 kilograms collected by the Apollo missions is kept locked away by NASA, with small samples given to researchers and a set of larger rocks loaned for exhibitions. Apollo 11 gift rocks typically weigh less than 0.05 grams or less than a grain of rice. The Apollo 17 gift rocks weigh approximately 1.1 grams. Both are housed in plastic globes to protect them and make them easier to see. According to museum spokeswoman Zendra Van Gelder, the museum contacted NASA after receiving the rock from the estate of late Prime Minister Willem Drees in 1992. Without seeing it, NASA told the museum that it was possible it was a moon rock. However, it weighed a whopping 89 grams or 3.1 ounces. Furthermore, its gold-colored cardboard plaque does not identify it as a moon rock. During the Apollo 11 astronauts' visit to the Netherlands on October 9, 1969, the US ambassador presented Drees with the rock. Drees' grandson, Willem, told the Associated Press that his grandfather had been out of office for more than a decade and was nearly deaf and blind in 1969, though his mind remained sharp. There is also the issue with the photos of the Gemini 10 spacewalk. NASA led several missions prior to Americans landing on the moon to prepare and practice several procedures critical to a successful mission to the moon. Project Gemini was a series of missions that ran from 1961 to 1966. During this time, a photograph of astronaut Michael Collins on one of his spacewalks was released. Although NASA has not officially confirmed that the photo of the moonwalk was faked, it is suspiciously similar to a photo taken during a training exercise. Many people believe the training image was manipulated with the background blacked out to look like space and the figure reversed. Who is to say that NASA hasn't faked more photos? One common question among moon landing skeptics is how the astronauts from the moon landing missions were able to bring back footage of the landing in such perfect condition. Some believe that the high levels of cosmic radiation in space would have fried the film or left some evidence of radiation exposure behind, with some even comparing the effects of airport X-rays on early film reels. However, many others argue that this would not have happened. According to reports, astronauts used specially designed cameras for the mission, and there wasn't necessarily enough radiation to cause the film to fog. A more perplexing and possibly damning question is why NASA erased footage of the original moon landing. Yes, that's right, NASA admitted in 2009 that the original recordings of the landing were among 200,000 other tapes set to be erased and reused as a cost-cutting measure. Could NASA have been concealing something? There's also some strange footage of astronauts moving around on the moon. You should watch the footage of the astronauts walking around on the moon if you haven't already. It's amusing to watch them stumble around on the moon's surface, and it makes you wonder how the physics of the moonwalk worked. Some speculate that the astronauts were in a warehouse with blacked-out walls, which could explain why there are no stars in any of the photos and are being held up by ropes or strings. The way they stumble forward gives the impression that they are balancing on a line around their waist, and the way they rise from their tumbles gives the impression that they are being pulled up from behind. But because the gravity on the moon is 1/6 that of Earth, is it a case that our brains don't know how humans would behave in that environment? Perhaps Americans did go to the moon, or NASA filmed it in a studio to ensure the film survived. Whatever the truth is, there are certainly many strange things associated with the moon landing, leading one to wonder if the moon landing happened or if it really happened the way NASA claims. Another issue with the mission is Operation Paperclip. But what exactly was Operation Paperclip? The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, a subcommittee of the Joint Intelligence Committee of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was tasked in 1945 with locating German scientists, doctors, and engineers deemed intellectually vital to the Third Reich. In a 2014 interview, journalist Annie Jacobsen stated that this was prompted by the Allies' concerns about Hitler's potential weapon arsenal. In the autumn of 1944, right after the Normandy landings, there were these little units of scientific intelligence officers scattered among the Allies' troops, and they were working to find out Hitler's biological, chemical, and atomic weapons. While the atomic weapons program was not as advanced as initially suspected, Hitler's biochemical weapons were. The hunt for this scientific treasure and ultimately the scientists themselves, Jacobsen writes in her book, sparked Operation Overcast, renamed Paperclip after the paperclips attached to the files of the most troublesome cases. It is important to note that the United States was not alone in this endeavor. Britain, France, and in particular the Soviet Union attempted to recruit these German scientific experts as well. The existence of Operation Paperclip would be motivated and justified by a US-Soviet technological rivalry characterized by the space race and Cold War. German scientists began arriving on American soil in the fall of 1945. Not all of the men recruited were Nazis or SS officers, but the most prominent and respected among them were, having worked directly with Hitler or with the leading members of the Nazi Party, such as Heinrich Himmler and Hermann Göring. While serving as director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center, Werner von Braun, a rocket engineer, was instrumental in developing the first U.S. ballistic missile, the Redstone, and later the Saturn V rocket. As a Nazi ideologue and SS member, he visited the Buchenwald concentration camp and handpicked slaves to work for him as laborers. Hubertus Strughold, a physiologist and medical researcher, led the German Air Force Institute of Aviation Medicine, which was notorious for torturous medical experiments on Dachau concentration camp inmates. Despite claiming ignorance of any such activity until after the war, Strughold was listed as one of 95 doctors at an October 1942 conference discussing their findings. He was the chief scientist of the Aerospace Medical Division at Brooks Air Force in the United States and is widely regarded as the father of space medicine. Former Nazi General Walter Schreiber also oversaw inhumane medical experiments involving bioweapons which resulted in countless deaths. He was captured by the Soviets after the war but defected to the United States. Jacobsen writes that he worked for various government agencies before settling in Texas at the Air Force School of Aviation Medicine. While Schreiber would later testify in the Nuremberg trials, he, von Braun, Strughold, and other Nazis brought to the United States would never be held accountable for their crimes. Throughout the Cold War, Operation Paperclip remained a closely guarded secret. Meanwhile, NASA is giving the moon landing another shot with the Artemis mission. NASA and the Canadian Space Agency, CSA, announced in April 2023 the 4 astronauts who will fly on Artemis 2, the first crewed Orion and SLS mission, which will orbit the moon in 2024. Raja Chari, Tom Marshburn, Kayla Barron, and Jennifer Siddy Gibbons are their names. The mission will put Orion's life support systems to the test as well as validate the capabilities and techniques required for humans to live and work in deep space. NASA intends to launch Artemis 3 in 2025 or 2026, which will land the first woman and person of color on the moon. The mission will also include the construction of a lunar outpost known as Gateway, which will serve as a staging area for lunar and Mars missions. SpaceX, Blue Origin, Dynetics, Japan, Europe, Australia, and other commercial and international partners will also be involved in the mission. The role of SpaceX in Project Artemis is to provide the commercial human landing system HLS that will transport astronauts from lunar orbit to the moon's surface and back. The HLS is based on SpaceX's Starship vehicle, which is designed to be reusable and capable of landing on a variety of planetary bodies. SpaceX will build and test its HLS under a NASA contract that includes several uncrewed and crewed demonstration missions. The HLS from SpaceX will be used for the following Artemis missions: Artemis 3, which will occur in 2025 or 26. 2 of Orion's 4 astronauts will be transferred to SpaceX's HLS for the final leg of their journey to the moon. In 2027, Artemis 4 will make the second crewed lunar landing. This mission will also include 4 astronauts aboard Orion, 2 of whom will land on the moon using SpaceX's HLS. This mission will also include the construction of the Gateway Lunar Outpost, which will serve as a staging point for lunar and Mars missions. Artemis 5 and beyond will continue to explore the lunar surface and conduct scientific and technological experiments. The HLS from SpaceX will enable regular and sustainable crew transportation to the moon, as well as support future Mars missions.